There's a saying that a mother can carry her child on her back for as long as her strength allows. But there comes a time when that child is expected to learn how to stand. Adaeze had been waiting for that time for years. When she first got married, she believed that the difficult part of her life was over. Her husband was not a rich man, but he was doing well enough for them to live comfortably. Adaeze had her own food stop business in the market, and between what she made from her shop and what her husband brought home, they managed their little family without having to beg anybody. Then things began to change. Her husband started having problems with his work. Money that used to come regularly became uncertain. Before long, they were borrowing to settle things they once handled without thinking twice. That was how Adaeze entered the world of loans. The first one did not frighten her. They only needed money to settle an urgent problem, and she believed they would repair it quickly. They did, but another problem came. Another loan followed. By the time their third child was born, Adaeze had become used to calculating her life around repayment debt. Sometimes money from her shop would enter her hand in the morning and leave before evening because somebody was waiting to collect what she owned. Still, she kept going. Then her husband died. His death did not leave Adaeze only with grief. It left her with 3 children, unpaid bills, and debt that did not disappear simply because the man who had helped create them was gone. Even his burial was done partly with a loan. By the time everybody who had come to mourn returned to their homes, Adaeze sat inside hers and looked at her 3 children who had nobody else to depend on. From that moment, she made up her mind about one thing. Whatever happened to her, those children would go to school. Her foot-stop shop became the center of their lives. What they ate came from there. School fees came from there. Uniforms, textbooks, transport fares, and almost every other expense came from the same shop. There were days Adaeze made good sales. There were also days she sat from morning until evening and returned home with almost nothing. Whenever the shop could no longer carry the family, she took another loan. She would borrow money to stock a bag of rice, beans, gari, cartons of noodles, vegetable oil, and other food items. She would sell, repaid the loan little by little, struggle to breathe for a few seconds, and then take another one. When school fees or some other expense came up, repair, borrow again. Repay, borrow again. That was Adaeze's life. Her children grew up knowing the market almost as well as they knew their home. During holidays, they sometimes came to help her. They carried small goods for customers, arranged items on the shelves, and watched the shop whenever Adaeze needed to step away. That was why almost everybody around Adaeze knew her children. The other market women watched them grow from small children into young adults. Adaeze did not mind the suffering as long as she believed it was leading somewhere. Whenever the children were still in school and tried to find some jobs to help her, she discouraged them. She wanted them to concentrate on their education. She had already accepted that the suffering was hers. Their own responsibility was to study and come out with good result. In Adaeze's mind, there was a simple arrangement between her and life. She would suffer now. Her children would succeed later. Then one day, she would rest. But when the children finished school, the life Adaeze had been waiting for did not come. Her eldest searched for work. For months, he submitted applications everywhere he could think of. Some companies never replied. Some called him for interviews and never contacted him again. The few jobs he managed to get barely lasted or paid so little that after transport and feeding, there was almost nothing left. The second child did not fare much better. The last one tried different things, but nothing seemed to stand. It became difficult for Adaeze to understand. They were not lazy children. They were not sitting at home waiting for their mother to continue feeding them. They were trying. That was what made it worse. One would almost get a good job, and something would happen. Another would find an opportunity that looked promising, and before Adaeze could even thank God properly, it would disappear. Years began to pass. Adaeze was still in the same market, still calculating loans, still worrying about how to stock her shop, still waiting for the day one of her children would finally call her with good news that would last. Meanwhile, all around her, other people's lives seemed to be moving. One afternoon, a woman who sold a few shops away came around, sharing invitations. Her daughter was getting married, the young man lived abroad, and the wedding preparations alone became the discussion of that section of the market for the day. Not long after that, another woman stopped coming to the market. At first, Adaeze thought she was sick. Then, she heard that the woman's daughter had taken her abroad to stay with her for some months. Adaeze was happy, but when she returned to her own shop and looked at the goods on the shelves, she found herself wondering when it would be her turn. Another morning, Adaeze arrived at the market and found carpenters working in a nearby shop. Shelves were being removed. The space beside it had been added, and the whole place was being expanded. The owner arrived later, looking happier than Adaeze had seen in a very long time. Her son was doing well now. He wanted his mother to expand the business so he could begin sending more goods. Adaeze congratulated her. She meant it, but those stories kept coming. Somebody's son bought his mother a car. Somebody's daughter paid for her parents to renovate their house. Another person's child got a good government job. Another one traveled and got married. And there was Adaeze, still taking loans, still stocking her shop with money that was not completely ours, still receiving calls from grown-up children who sometimes needed her help instead of being able to help her. People began noticing. At first, the comments sounded harmless. Some of the women would encourage her and tell her that everybody's time was different. They reminded her that her children were educated and that one day something good will surely happen. But Adaeze had spent too many years around those women not to recognize when pity had entered their voices. Sometimes the encouragement itself embarrassed her more than an insult would have. Whenever another woman announced something good her child had done, somebody would eventually remember Adaeze and assure her that her own children would soon make her proud. Still, she would smile. What else could she do? Then the loans began getting worse. Business was no longer moving the way it used to, but Adaeze kept putting money into the shop because closing it frightened her. The shop had carried her family for years. It was one of the things she still had. So when goods finished, she borrowed to replace them. When the loan was due and sales had been poor, she struggled to repair. Sometimes she used money meant for one thing to settle another. She was no longer running the business comfortably. She was chasing money around. One afternoon, a woman she had known in the market for years came to collect money Adaeze had owed her. Adaeze did not have the complete amount. She tried to explain that sales had been poor and asked for a little more time. The woman looked around Adaeze's shop before finally seeing what nobody else had been. Bold enough to tell her directly, "Adaeze, let me tell you the truth though. Close this shop." Adaeze looked at her. The woman continued, "You are taking loans to stock goods. You will sell the goods and use the money to pay loan. Then when the shop is empty again, you will take another loan. How long do you want to continue like this? Tell me." Adaeze's face changed. "Those children you suffered to train are already grown. Instead of them to help, you are still carrying everything on your head. Close the shop and find something else to do before loan finishes you." Adaeze did not agree with her. She found the balance of the woman's money and paid her as soon as she could. But those words followed her home. That night, she could not sleep. For the first time, Adaeze allowed herself to think about how long she has been waiting. She had waited when the children were in primary school. She had waited throughout secondary school. She had told herself that once they graduated, things would change. They graduated. Still, she waited again. Nothing changed. Instead, she was getting older. Her shop was struggling, and the loans she thought would disappear once her children became independent were still following her. Adaeze began praying differently. She was no longer asking God for herself. She wanted something to happen for her children, anything good. She attended programs whenever somebody told her about a church where people were receiving breakthroughs. She went for prayers, She met prophets. She sowed the little seeds she could afford. If somebody told her about a place where people prayed seriously over family problems, Adaeze found her way there. Months passed. Nothing changed. One night, one of her children called her to tell her about another opportunity that had failed. After the call, Adaeze sat alone for a long time. She was tired. Not the kind of tiredness that sleep could cure. She began wondering whether there was something wrong with her family that ordinary prayer had not touched. Perhaps there was something following her children, or perhaps somebody somewhere had done something. That was when a thought Adaeze would once have rejected entered her mind. A native doctor. She pushed it away at first, but it returned. The more she thought about it, the more she asked herself what exactly had changed over the past few years. Adaeze was not looking for anybody to die. If there was something they could give her to keep in the house, she would take it. If there was something she needed to do for doors to open for her children, she wanted to hear it, and there was a price to pay. Adaeze had already decided it should fall on her, not on her children. She had carried them this far already. She would carry them one more time. A few days later, Adaeze closed her shop earlier than usual. By then, she had already asked enough questions to know where she was going. Okay, she bought a vehicle and traveled outside her town further than she normally went. For years, Adaeze had taken loans because she believed one day her children would succeed and everything she had suffered would finally make sense. Now, she was tired of waiting. So Adaeze went for help, and this time she was not going to a church. By the time she arrived, she had already prepared what she wanted to say. The native doctor listened as Adaeze explained that she had 3 grown-up children whom she had struggled to educate, yet nothing seemed to work for them. She wanted something that would make things easier for her children financially, but she did not want to kill anybody. She did not want human sacrifice, and she did not want any form of ritual that would require the life of another person. The native doctor listened until she finished. Then he told her something simple. Everything came with a price. If Adaeze wanted something beyond the ordinary, she could not also expect to walk away without giving anything in return. The only question was, what price was she willing to pay? Adaeze thought about her children. If anything must happen, let them happen to me. Leave my children out of it. For the first time since she arrived, the native doctor looked surprised. He studied Adaeze for a while, almost as if he wanted to know whether she truly understood what she had just said. But Adaeze did not change her mind. Whatever the consequences were, she would carry it herself. The native doctor eventually stood up and disappeared into another room. When he returned, he was holding a small wooden bow. He placed it in front of Adaeze. The bow looked ordinary. There was no strange markings on it. Nothing frightening about it. If Adaeze had seen it in somebody's kitchen, she would not have looked at it twice. But what the native doctor told her next made her look at it differently. As long as people willingly put money into that bowl, her children would never lack any good thing. Adaeze frowned. She had expected something more complicated. The native doctor explained that the bowl was not interested in the money itself. Anybody who willingly dropped money inside it was giving away something far more important. Their good fortune, the opportunities, favor, the good things meant to locate them. Whatever good was supposed to enter the life of that person would be taken and redirected towards Adaeze's children. Adaeze stayed at the boat. That was all. Nobody had to die. She did not have to sacrifice anybody. All she needed was for different people to put money inside the bowl. For a moment, it sounded almost too easy. Then came the warning. The native doctor told her never to become careless simply because the instructions sounded simple. Nobody who knew Adaeze personally must put money inside that bowl. Not a relative, not a friend, not somebody from her market. The day money from somebody who knew her entered that bowl, everything would turn, and it would begin with Adaeze. All the bad things attached to the life she had collected from would begin finding their way back to her. The problems she had unknowingly taken from different people would become hands to carry. The same way her children's lives had been risen through the bow was the same way they would begin to fall. Adaeze's confidence disappeared. She looked at the bow again. This time, it no longer looked harmless. For several minutes, she sat there, thinking she could still leave it. She could stand up, thank the man, and go home. But going home meant returning to the same life she had been complaining about. Adaeze reached for the bow. Before leaving, she asked how she was supposed to get different people to put money inside it. The native doctor made it clear that that part was her problem. He had given her what she asked for. How she got people to put money was entirely up to her. By the time Adaeze stepped outside, she already had an idea. She would beg. She would travel far enough that nobody would know her, dressed like an ordinary beggar, and sit somewhere busy. People gave money to old women begging on the road every day. If she was careful, nobody would ever know. Adaeze was too impatient to wait. That same day, she traveled further away from home, bought a cheap old wrapper, and found a place where she could change. She tied a fed scarf around her head, removed anything that made her look comfortable, and carried a wooden bowl with her. When she found a busy place, she sat down. The first few minutes were embarrassing. Adaeze could hardly raise her head. This was a woman who had spent years running her own shop. She had suffered, yes, but she had never sat beside the road asking strangers for money. Now people were walking past her as though she had always been there. Some ignored her, some looked at her and continued walking. Then an elderly man stopped and dropped some money into the bowl. Adaeze looked at it. Not long afterwards, a woman added hers, then another person. Little by little, money began entering the bowl. Adaeze remained there watching. She did not know what she expected to see. Perhaps she had expected something strange to happen immediately. Nothing did. Then her phone rang. Adaeze almost ignored it when she checked. It was one of her sons. She answered. The young man could barely contain himself. A company he had applied to some time ago had called him. This was the same company that had previously told him there were no vacancy. Now, they wanted him. Adaeze stood up so quickly that a few people nearby looked at her. For a moment, she forgot that she was supposed to be an old woman, begging. Her son finally had a proper job. Adaeze looked down at her bowl. There was money inside. A strange feeling entered her. Could it really have happened that quickly? She packed her things and left. For the next few days, Adaeze did not beg. Her son's good news had shaken her more than she had expected. A part of her wanted desperately to believe that the timing was a coincidence. Maybe God had finally answered her prayers. After all, she had prayed for years. She decided to leave the boy alone. Then things became quiet again. Nothing happened for the other two children. Adaeze waited. After some time, curiosity became stronger than fear. She took the bow out again. This time, she planned properly. She chose another busy town, far from anywhere she normally went. She changed her clothes before getting there and made herself look as different as possible. Then she sat down to beg. People filled the bowl. Soon after, another opportunity came. Then another. That was enough for Adaeze. She stopped calling it coincidence. From then on, begging became part of her life. 3 times every week, Adaeze traveled far away from home. She became clever about it. She never begged anywhere close to the house. She avoided places where traders from her market normally went to buy goods. If she noticed too many familiar accents or faces that made her uncomfortable, she moved. She also learned how to look like somebody nobody would examine twice. Gold dropper-worn slippers, a loose blouse, a scarf tied carelessly around her head. Sometimes, she rubbed a little dust on her clothes before sitting down, and always the wooden bow stared in front of her. People were especially generous because of her age. Some dropped small notes and walked away. Some stopped to ask so that she had eaten. Some gave her enough money to buy food. Adaeze accepted everything. The boy kept filling, and her children's lives kept changing. The son who had received the job began earning properly. Another child got an opportunity that finally worked instead of collapsing halfway. The third began doing so well that Adaeze sometimes sat alone, wondering whether these were truly the same children she had spent years worrying about. Money started coming to her too. Her children did not forget their mother. They remembered the woman who had taken loan after loan to put them through school. Now that they could finally afford to take care of her, they did. Adaeze stopped struggling in the market. There was no reason to continue running the same food stop shop that had kept her in debt for years. Her children gave her money. They improved her life. They helped her start a proper boutique, something cleaner and more comfortable than the shop where she had spent most of her adult life calculating loans. For the first time in years, Adaeze looked like a woman whose children were doing well. She dressed better. She ate better. She no longer had people coming after her for loan repayment. And whenever the market women who had known her during the difficult years saw her, they saw exactly what Adaeze had always wanted them to see. A mother finally enjoying the fruit of her labor. But Adaeze did not stop begging. On the mornings she was supposed to go to her boutique, she would dress normally and leave home like every other working woman. Somewhere far away, she would change and become someone else. She could leave her car somewhere safe and continue by public transport, especially when she felt driving too close, where she begged might attract attention. By morning, she would be sitting beside a busy road with the pool right in front of her. By evening, she would change back into Adaeze. Nobody at home questioned her. Why would they? She had a business. She had money. Her children were doing well. And the good news did not stop. Her daughter met a man who wanted to marry her. The relationship went well. Families met. Wedding plans followed. Adaeze watched her only daughter get married in a beautiful ceremony and felt as though somebody had finally rewritten the story of her family. Not long afterwards, her daughter became pregnant. Her sons were doing well too. One was rising steadily in his career. The other was finally making the kind of money that allowed him to plan his life instead of merely surviving it. Adaeze herself had become comfortable, and then it happened on an ordinary day. Adaeze had traveled far from home as usual. She had chosen a busy commercial area where traders came from different towns to buy goods in bulk. She had begged there before, but not often enough for anybody to become familiar with her face. That morning, she changed into her old clothes, tied her fade scarf low across her forehead, and settled at a corner where people constantly passed. She knew how long to stay in one place, when to move, and most importantly, how to avoid anybody who looked familiar. What Adaeze did not know was that one of the women from her old market had traveled to that same area to restock her shop. The woman had brought her young granddaughter along. They had spent most of the money moving from one wholesaler to another, pricing goods and arranging what would be transported back home. At some point, the little girl noticed an old woman sitting at the side of the road with a bowl. She felt sorry for her. The girl asked her mother for some money, and the woman, distracted by the goods she was checking, handed her a small note without paying much attention. The child hurried towards Adaeze. Adaeze saw a little girl approaching her and thought nothing of it. Children had given her money before. The girl bent down and dropped the note straight into the wooden bowl. Adaeze smiled and thanked her. Then she heard a woman's voice calling the child. The grandmother had turned around and noticed how close her daughter was to the road. She quickly left what she was doing and hurried over, complaining that the child should not wander away without telling her. Adaeze was already luring her face when the woman reached them, took her grandchild by the hand, and was about to leave when something made her stop and look at the beggar again. She stopped. Adaeze felt it immediately. The woman narrowed her eyes. There was something familiar about that face. She looked again, this time properly. Adaeze. Adaeze's entire body went cold. The woman moved closer. Adaeze, is that you? Adaeze could not speak. The woman was completely confused. Of all the people she could have expected to find begging by the roadside, Adaeze was the last. Everybody knew how well Adaeze's children were doing, so why was she sitting there dressed like a beggar? The woman kept asking questions, but Adaeze barely heard any of them. Her eyes had gone to the pool. The money was already inside. Money from the granddaughter of a woman who knew her. Adaeze grabbed the bowl. She gathered her things so quickly that the other woman became even more confused. Adaeze, wait, what is going on? Adaeze did not wait. She hurried away from there as though somebody was chasing her. The woman called after her, but Adaeze refused to turn. She pushed through the crowd, found somewhere to change, and went straight home. For the first time since her children's life began changing, Adaeze was truly afraid of that bow. She remembered every word the native doctor had told her. Adaeze locked the bow away. That night, she barely slept. She kept waiting for something to happen. Every strange sound frightened her. Whenever her phone rang, her heart would jump. She checked herself repeatedly, wondering whether she was becoming sick. By morning, nothing had happened. She began wondering whether perhaps the native doctor had only frightened her so that she would obey his instruction. Maybe nothing would happen. But she refused to go baking again. For 2 complete days, Adaeze hardly left the house. When her children called, she spoke to them normally. If the price had finally come, Adaeze was prepared to pay it. She had already made that decision long ago. If death was coming, then let it take her quietly. Just leave her children alone. On the 3rd day, her phone rang. It was her daughter. She was in labor. For a few seconds, Adaeze forgot everything about the bow. She dressed up quickly and rushed to the hospital. Her daughter survived, but the baby did not. When Adaeze heard, she felt something drop inside her. Her first thought was the bow, but she rejected it immediately. She refused to believe it. Her daughter needed her, so she pushed her own fear aside and stayed close, comforting her as best as she could. But before the family could even begin to process the loss, another call came. One of her sons had gotten into a serious trouble at work. Something had gone wrong involving money and records connected to his department. Whether he had caused it or not, his name was among those being questioned, and until the matter was resolved, he had been suspended. Adaeze listened without speaking. Her hand began trembling. 2 pieces of bad news almost together. Still, she told herself not to panic. Then another call came later. Her son had suffered a major financial loss. A business arrangement into which he had put a large amount of money had collapsed unexpectedly. That was when Adaeze understood it had started. The baby, the job, the money, everything that had risen so quickly was beginning to fall just as quickly. Adaeze was still inside the hospital when something inside her finally gave way. Her daughter was lying on the bed, grieving for the baby she had lost. Relatives were speaking quietly around the room. Adaeze had been sitting silently for several minutes when suddenly she began to laugh. At first, everybody thought they had wrongly. Then Adaeze laughed again, louder. Her daughter looked at her. There was nothing funny in the room, yet the laughter became uncontrollable. Someone held her shoulders and tried to calm her, but Adaeze looked at the person and laughed as though she had heard the funniest joke of her life. That was how Adaeze's madness began. Her children thought it was shock. They assumed the death of her grandchild, combined with all the bad news, had simply been too much for her. They got her medical attention. They paid for tests. They took her from one specialist to another when she failed to improve. Nothing brought their mother back to herself. Eventually, her children had no choice but to place her in a mental health facility where she could be properly watched and cared for. And while they were spending money trying to save their mother, their own lives continued falling apart. Nobody knew the full story. Nobody knew about the native doctor or about the wooden bow. At the end of the day, it became worse to how it was from the beginning for Adaeze.